Jamil Jaffer is the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. Mr. Jaffer, thanks for being with us. Your background is in national security, and you have worked on foreign policy, intelligence, and surveillance. Your thoughts or concerns or reaction when you first learned that these documents had been leaked?
Well, Del, obviously it's very troubling. The information that we're talking about here relates to sensitive U.S. government operations, our relationship with allies, what surveillance we're conducting of them, and what we know about what they're thinking. And in particular, with respect to the Ukraine war, what we understand the Ukrainians' capabilities to be, their ability to defend themselves when it comes to their airspace, and the way they're utilizing equipment that we're giving them and how fast it's running out and when it needs to be replaced. All of that is very valuable and current information that the Russians can use to better prepare themselves for that conflict and better fight that conflict.
Mr. Jaffer, this obviously could have a major impact on our relationship with our allies. The New York Times describing the leak as a nightmare for the Five Eyes. Of course, that is the intelligence alliance of Australia and Canada, New Zealand, the UK, and the US. Retired Army Major Mike Lyons had this to say.
This has national security implications on the ground, signals intelligence, SIGINT, so to speak. It shows us eavesdropping on our allies. Some of this information came from other countries. It had certain classifications that only certain other countries had, New Zealand, Australia, not even normal NATO allies, so to speak. So this is a significant breach.
It's not uncommon for countries to keep tabs on their allies, but how can we expect our allies to react, and what damage control do we have to do?
Well, Dylan, you're exactly right. It isn't unusual for us to spy on our allies and for them to spy on us. But what it is unusual is for it to come out publicly. And it's embarrassing for those nations. And it can be embarrassing for us, too, particularly when, as here, some of that information goes to internal relationships within that country and things going on that might not be good for their public to know, or that they may not know themselves that we now know because we have access to their internal communications.
I'm curious, we don't know who is behind the alleged leak, but based on what we know so far, are there any clues or tea leaves that you are reading as to who might be responsible?
Well, Del, you know, some of this information is very diverse, right? Some of it is about Ukraine, some of it is about some of our allies, and so it's not clear that it came from a single source, that the person pulled it from one place. It's not even clear that it's one single person. But if we assume it's one person, there are a couple of things you might look at. For example, there are internal memos and internal analyses conducted by the Joint Staff. That is, the people who support the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense, and the heads of all of our military components. Now, it may be that it's somebody from within the Department of Defense that has access to that information as well as other information available in the classified internet. So that's a potential scenario, but we're not really sure. The Justice Department is looking into it, Dell, and we'll try and figure out exactly who that might be. It's going to be a hard time, though, to figure this out.
I'm curious, we hear so much about false flags. Could this be a head fake on the part of the Pentagon to try and throw off Moscow with regards to what may be a spring offensive underway in Ukraine?
You know, it's an interesting question, Del. A lot of people have suggested, or some people have suggested, that it might be a U.S. government misinformation or disinformation effort. If it is, it's a very clever one because we are really harming ourselves in certain ways and making it look like we have information about our allies. That's problematic. So if that's not true, it's a very creative and deceptive misinformation operation. It seems unlikely, though. You have a lot of U.S. intelligence officials out there saying they believe this is genuine. We have seen some alterations made to the documents, but it looks like those were made by the Russians to support their own cause after the fact. So right now, Del, count me as skeptical of that theory, but it's certainly one that's been put out there.
So on that issue of altered documents, how do we know what's real and what is altered in this world of spy versus spy?
That is a terrific question. You know, some of the alterations were fairly obvious, and people pointed them out right away. And we had examples of the unaltered documents. But there's a lot there that we might not be sure is altered or not. And sometimes, you know, what the intelligence community can do is, in order to track documents, they'll introduce small changes that determine where the document came from, what tranche it was from. So there may very well be sort of Easter eggs, as they call them, hidden in these documents that might allow the intelligence community to figure out whose documents these were. But as of right now, it looks like the majority of documents are genuine and do relate to sensitive U.S. government matters, the disclosure of which could be very damaging to our national security.
Mr. Jaffer, do we have any idea on the scale how bad this series of leaks actually is? We're all familiar with WikiLeaks, for instance, and we know that Edward Snowden is still in Moscow right now. Compared to WikiLeaks, where does this stack up?
Well, you know, it's interesting because we're not sure how many documents there are. We know about 100 have been talked about thus far, and maybe 50 have been sort of out there in various forums on the internet. It could be that there's a larger trove that haven't yet been released, so we're not sure about that. With respect to these documents thus far, it does seem smaller in scale than WikiLeaks or the Snowden disclosures. And yet, because of the recency of these documents, Del, the fact that some of them were generated just as early as a few weeks ago, and they relate to ongoing operations, including an ongoing war, the immediate damage could be significant from these documents, even though the long-term ramifications might be less than the Snowden documents, the Vault 7, or maybe even the WikiLeaks documents released by Chelsea Manning.
Jamil Jaffer, the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. Mr. Jaffer, thanks for your insight.
Thanks, Del.